In the Gospel of Matthew, shortly before the reading we're about to hear, we find Matthew's version of the calling of the first disciples, the text that we looked at last week. In Matthew, Jesus is described as walking near the sea when he encounters these men, and he calls them from their fishing profession, saying, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And Matthew says they do just that. They leave everything, they drop everything, and they just leave and they follow. Following Jesus as he begins teaching in the synagogue, following Jesus as he begins to proclaim the good news, following Jesus as he cures diseases and sickness, Matthew says, so much so that a lot of other people began to follow him as well. So you have this group of disciples forming, but you also have this huge crowd of very interested people also following and listening and straining to get close enough to hear what Jesus might have to say. All of them evidently seeking to find something, some healing or some happiness or some meaning in their life perhaps, or something that they're missing. So they follow this group, who I would suppose are not so very different from most of us, and the things that we want, and the things that we long for. But sometimes we know those things that we long for, those things that we need, those things that we feel are missing can be hard to find. From the Gospel of Matthew, the 5th chapter, the first 12 verses. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down and his disciples came to him, then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The words of God. There's a resident in a nursing home in the Grange that's been on our hospice program for some time. Her name is Mrs. Rosser. She's an older black woman, very arthritic. Can't really walk anymore, has a lot of heart issues and dementia. Sometimes she's on oxygen. She can't see very well, and to make matters even worse, she cannot hear. Even speaking loudly directly into her ear, she cannot hear. When I would try to talk to her, she would smile and just shake her head and say, "I can't hear you. I just don't know why I can't hear no more." Writing things down doesn't work either because she can't see well enough to read what you've written. I'd said in our meetings for some time now that I so wish that Mrs. Rosser could hear because she so wants to communicate. But of course she has no money for hearing aids, and Medicaid will not pay for hearing aids, especially for a woman who's dying. But I remembered that once upon a time we had this little device called a pocket talker, which was a simple amplification device with earplugs attached to a little box, and you could talk into it and it increased the sound going into the other person's ears. So I brought it up again and insisted that we should at least try, and I got it okayed, and I got one, and I took it this past week to the nursing home. Mrs. Rosser was asleep, but she awakened when I touched her arm, and using big gestures that I hope she understood, I was trying to explain to her what I wanted to do, and I put one of those 2 types of earplugs that came with that device into her ear. It was hard, and it sort of fit around the ear, and I plugged it into the little box, and I turned it on and spoke into the box, but there was no response. So I took it out, and I put the other earplug in her ear, which was very soft, and it fit down into the ear canal a bit, and I plugged it into the little box, and I spoke into the box, and I said, "Mrs. Rosser, can you hear me?" And her face just lit up. And she said, "Yes, I can. Lord, have mercy." And we had a bit of a conversation. And she was smiling the whole time. And I told her I was going to leave it and put it in her nightstand drawer. And as I was leaving, this frail little old woman said to me, "Lord, it was so good to hear something again. It was so good to hear something again." Sometimes in life, the things that we want or that we feel that we need are very easy to define. So very easy. We know very well what they are, at least in our imaginations, but sometimes moving toward that is difficult. Sometimes a lot more difficult than we hope. But sometimes those things that we seek or that we search for, that we hope for, are very elusive. They're hard to grasp. They're hard to find. They just are. And if that desire, that want, is somehow unmet, if it leaves us stuck in the place where we are, feeling unsatisfied and disheartened, with no movement, with nothing to look forward to, if there's nothing but just that, then the circumstances sometimes surround us in the now. Circumstances that may make us feel that we're out of control, if there is indeed such a thing as control in the first place. But to a very real extent, I think that these words in this text that we just heard speak to this kind of a situation. These very well-known words of Matthew, called the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes. As this part of the story begins, Jesus and his disciples, surrounded by this crowd of people that have gathered, that are seeking and searching and following people, they all kind of go up to the mountain, the text says, where Jesus sits down and has this huge crowd gather around him, and he begins to teach them. Now, several years ago, when I went to Israel, I was taken by the group leader to a place where some people believe this very thing happened. It's on the shore of the Lake of Galilee, and there's a place, it's sort of a cove, and the land sort of forms a sloped down sort of a natural amphitheater. There are banana trees planted there now, but it's easy to imagine this is a spot where a large group could sit and hear all at the same time while Jesus spoke what they wanted to hear, what they came seeking to hear. But I'm sure that for them, just as it is for us perhaps, his opening words were perhaps not exactly what they expected. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Because that's how Jesus begins this story. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And that's quickly followed by blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek, and blessed are those who hunger and thirst, and who are persecuted and reviled and falsely accused. And to the original audience, just like us, I think, would have had the same initial response. Where is the blessing in this? In any of these sort of life situations? Blessed are the meek and the mournful and the poor in the spirit. I mean, what's so good? What could possibly be good about hungering and thirsting for anything or being reviled and persecuted? If these are words that are supposed to be helpful and comforting, they don't seem like that, at least initially. They do, however, cover a lot of problems and issues. They are perhaps very descriptive of where these people, this original audience was, what they were dealing with, and where perhaps a lot of us may be now. So they are very encompassing words. But where's the blessing in them? We just don't perhaps see it. But this is the picture that Matthew gives us right here of Jesus sitting there teaching, defining or maybe redefining how following him with these words that may seem elusive at best or maybe even contradictory, at least in feel if we're honest. But this is what we have. The merciful, who are willing to forgive, but to what aim? To be heard again. The pure in heart who believe that things are fair, that life is fair, when, come on, we know that life is just not fair. The peacemakers who do what they think is right and fair and get hurt because they expect others to do the same. But here Jesus says that these people dealing with these very issues are blessed. So maybe we hear this, and if we're honest, we just don't like what we hear, or maybe we feel at least that we just don't really know what to do with these words, with this text, with these Beatitudes. I mean, they sound pretty slick and pretty, but do they have any real value in our world, in the real world? But if we do try to hear them, if we really pay attention, we notice that they're not a collection of warnings. There's no shoulds and oughts or shalls or shall nots. They're not worded to say that if you do this, then you will receive that. It doesn't begin by saying that if you are meek, then you will be blessed. Instead, what we notice is that each statement begins in the present, where the people are right now, where we perhaps are right now at this moment, and it moves to the future. Each one looks ahead, but it starts. They each have their beginning in the now. Blessed are, for they will. To this group of people who are seeking, who are looking to Jesus, these statements are meant to help them look and to see and to find that which may be for them right now hard to see. To show them that regardless of where they may be right now, there's a new, better thing in the future. These statements contain the words, the image, the encouragement that the way things are right now is not necessarily the way that things will always be. That was the message of these words back then to that group of people who were sitting on the ground that day. And that's the message of these words to us now, sitting here. And their power seems to be connected to what it is that we're seeking. What it is that is somehow escaping them or us at the moment. Where we're sitting on what side of the hill when we hear this. Because these words, these Beatitudes, they sound very differently when we're up on top. When we're on top of everything and when things are going our way, they feel very differently than when we're on the bottom or feel like we are. When things are going great and we're feeling self-assured and confident and satisfied, maybe they don't sound like so much. But when we find ourselves in a bad place, feeling maybe stepped on by life, when life that we assume would be ours at this point certainly just isn't. And we struggle and we try to figure it out and we get stressed. These Beatitudes sound completely different if we will just listen to them. They offer us hope. They offer us promise. They feed us with this word of blessing and promise that things will not always be as they seem right now. That somehow, even if we can't see it at all because the trees are too thick or the mountains too steep or the communication just too impaired, somehow things will work out. We will move from where we are, this place where we are, this time where we are, to a better place. If we will hear, if we will. These words of Jesus can meet us where we are, wherever that might be, and remind us that we do indeed collectively have a future, all of us, regardless of where we may be sitting right now. Because there are times when we all find ourselves sitting on that ground, like these first people to hear. Perhaps broken, perhaps afraid, not where we want to be or really and truly ever thought we would be. And all we can see or feel, at least for the moment, is that there has been a big loss, that things are just not just right at all. And maybe we don't even know why, or maybe we do. But if there's no chance for movement, if there's no looking forward, if we do not at least see a chance for change, we can become broken and we can become consumed by despair, and our woundedness may just never heal. We have to move forward. God wants us to move forward. And perhaps because of that universal need, maybe this text continues after all these years to speak so well and so very clearly if we will but let ourselves hear. Blessed are those, for they will be. Blessed are those, for they will be. Present to future. Thanks be to God for this promise. Amen.